State's Inspector General is making her rounds across the state after releasing a report on the progress her office has made in the past 2 years. Their purpose, to investigate fraud, corruption, and abuse of power in state government.
Lucy Lang joins us now live in studio. Inspector General, thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a particular pleasure to be here after watching the eclipse from Niagara Falls State Park yesterday.
A very special day to say, nonetheless. So there are 3 offices under you, the Inspector General. For those at home who may be unfamiliar, tell us a little bit about the work your offices do.
I oversee 7 offices across the state that include investigators, auditors, and lawyers, and we investigate all allegations of fraud and corruption in the state executive agencies, the welfare system, and the workers' compensation system. So it's a tall order.
Now, when it comes to the number of people, I suppose you would oversee in those departments, those 7 departments, what are we talking about as far as state agencies? And then do you have those locales, like the Attorney General, for example? She has an office here in Buffalo. Is there an Inspector General office here in Buffalo or in other locales across the state? And can people interact with them?
Absolutely. We have a robust office here in Buffalo. We have one in Albany, one in New York City, and several others. But we all really work together around the state.
So there was a big report recently released. Tell us some of the things that you looked at in putting this, looking back at the last 2 years.
One of the things we're proudest of is the extent to which we've really invested in transparency with the public. We're talking to reporters, we're talking to the public, we're talking to educators about the work we do to investigate fraud and corruption. And to that end, I encourage New Yorkers who suspect fraud and corruption in state government to report it to 1-800-DO-RIGHT and to follow us at New York State IG on social media. We're really pleased that all of our transparency efforts have resulted in increased numbers of complaints coming in from the public, which is really one of the core ways that we're able to identify what's going wrong and work with our partner agencies to set it right.
Among some of the complaints that you got, I imagine, and also the subsequent investigations, particularly over the past 2 years and maybe even back further, starting with the pandemic, of course, is all of the fraud that happened as a result of workers' comp, PPE, all those different loans and things like that. That falls under the bailiwick of the Inspector General. I'm curious why, because now there's a tremendous amount, and really 2022, 2023, it took a couple years to get those investigations and those prosecutions ramped up. Why do you think it took such a long time as we were in the sort of heart of that pandemic?
Well, anytime there are systems put in place to help New Yorkers in need, like the unemployment insurance that came in during the pandemic, there's always a risk for abuse. And then there's a bit of a lag while those investigations catch up. We develop an infrastructure to investigate them. We work with partner federal, state, and local agencies, and we continue those investigations post-pandemic. But at the same time, we have to do the ordinary investigations that come out of, say, the welfare system. We had a case very recently here in Western New York where a man was receiving welfare benefits, SNAP benefits, in the names of his 2 minor children, of whom he didn't even have custody. And in a case like that, where someone is getting government benefits to which they're not entitled at the cost of his children and other rightful beneficiaries, it's critically important that we hold folks accountable.
And I guess, and that's a good example, that was something that had happened within the past couple of years. But when it comes to like a pandemic, we were going through it for years or several months and then years before really anything was happening. And yet here we go, we look back a couple of years and it's like people were taking $30 million or $60 million frauds, $130 million frauds over the course of 3 years. Seems like a lot. And it seems like it should have been caught earlier. Do you think that was the fault of the system? In other words, should legislators have set up less permeable legislation, less permeable law so that people couldn't bilk the system so easily?
What we're really working on right now are making sure that there are regulations and protocols in place to ensure that in the future, should we find ourselves in a dire situation that's unforeseen again, that we don't find the extent of fraud and abuse that we saw coming out of the pandemic.
What are some of those lessons, you think? Because I think you're exactly right. There's so much to be learned from something of that size, a pandemic, quite literally, right? So what do you think the state could take away to ensure that the system is not as easily fooled or frauded by people out there looking to bilk the system?
For example, we saw a tremendous amount of waste at a nursing home for veterans. And that really was the result, in large part, of a failure of communication amongst state agencies. So we, as a result, have worked with the relevant agencies to make sure that there are continual check-ins, to make sure that there are audits, and to make sure that people are very much on the same page about what the needs and expectations are. In ordinary times, times and, of course, in times of tragedy and crisis.
So you mentioned transparency was your biggest thing when you became Inspector General. So this report looks back the last 2 years. What are you focusing now looking ahead to the future?
Gosh, we're really focusing now on continuing our work with the agencies that support the most vulnerable New Yorkers. And to our mind, that includes the State Department of Corrections, the Office of Children and Family Services, and of course the welfare system. So our commitment is to make sure that New Yorkers understand that the Office of the Inspector General is here to ensure the government is working for people, but in particular, New Yorkers most in need.
And Inspector General, can you give us that number again? Because I want people to know that they don't have to always call Albany. There are local resources that your office provides. How can people locally get in touch with you?
Every complaint that comes in to our hotline is investigated thoroughly. That is 1-800-DO-RIGHT. And our social media, and we receive complaints in through those channels as well, is at New York State IG.
And in case you at home missed any of that, we will have everything linked on our website, WIVB.com. Inspector General Lucy Lang, thank you so much for taking the time to come in this afternoon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our important work.
Thank you. Chief Meteorologist Todd Santos keeping an eye on an absolutely beautiful day, Todd, but hopefully folks